whose seed is in itself upon the earth, and it was so. And the earth brought forth grass and herb, yielding seed after his kind, and the tree yielding fruit, whose seed was in itself after his kind. And God saw that it was good. This is the basis of all biology. Everything reproduces according to its kind. So when we come to the animal creation, in verse 21, we say, God created great whales and every living creature that moves, which the waters brought forth abundantly after their kind, and every winged fowl after his kind. And God saw that it was good. And verse 24, and God said, let the earth bring forth the living creature after his kind, cattle and creeping things, and beasts of the earth after his kind. You get the picture here? After his kind. It's basic biology. Everything reproduces according to its kind. And then you come over here to verse 26, and what does it say? And God said, let us make man in our image. All right, so all the animal creature is created after his kind, its kind. We are created in the image and the likeness of God. No other creation is said to be that. The angels are not created after the likeness of God. Mankind is created after in the likeness of God. So it says here, God says, let them, that is, man is, as we see, is male and female. Male and female. It says, let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the fowl of the air, over the cattle, over the earth, over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth. And this verse 27, so God created man in his own image, in the image of God, created him, male and female created he him. So mankind is not just, when we say man, we don't mean male, we mean male and female. This is the image of God. We're all created in the image of God. All right? So this is very, very important here. All right? And then we get into this, this other piece here about the specific creation. So Adam is created, and the woman is nowhere in sight. Woman is inside Adam. And it says that, you know the story, God puts the man asleep, and he pulls. You know, the translation is that, well, King James says rib. You know, Martin Luther called his wife my rib. But it's probably better to see it as the side. The side. So God pulls the woman from the side of man. Pulls it, you know, there she is. We used to laugh. You know, we're all not guys. You know, and the Hebrew word is banah, and so it means built. And so we said, well, the woman was built. So yeah, it's
got it.
So you know, you have to say, well,
It had to be there.
yeah, that's right. So, but this is, you know, this is the way God, and the word salah is from the side. So, you know, we're entering, and what does Adam say? This is, you know, bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. You know, so this is the way you know God begins his creation, and then He gives mankind a choice. He says you can eat from every tree in the garden, but from one tree you cannot eat, from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Because God says that if you eat from it, you will die. Okay. And what they really understood about death is hard to understand. You know, we don't really understand. They fully comprehended that. But the Hebrew literally says, dying, you will die. And so when they do eat from the forbidden fruit, they died. What does that mean? Dying, you will die. They died immediately spiritually. They died immediately spiritually. They won't die physically for another, Adam lives to be 930 years. So this process of death begins. But the immediate death is spiritual death. And when you see this, and you see it in their relationship to one another, man and woman. What are they? It says, let's see where we hit. That says, verse 7 of chapter 3, and the eyes of them both were opened, and they knew they were naked. And they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves aprons. They never worried about that before. So their relationship changed immediately, and they sought to cover themselves. Now what this nakedness means is, uncertain. They didn't wear clothes, obviously, but it could have been that they were imbued with some glory covering them. And it may have been that, this glory went away. But anyway, they saw that they were no longer like they were before. And this was all a result of death, spiritual death. All right, so it broke their relationship. It changed their relationship with one another. And, the effects of this disobedience continues. We are all fallen creatures. And this is why, we have to be redeemed. We have to be saved. It also changed their relationship. So we have this kind of horizontal relationship that's been changed, and we see this vertical relationship that's been changed. Because it was, so we go down here in verse 9, and he says, and the Lord God called unto Adam and said unto him, where are you? Well, God knew where he was, but basically he was saying to him, why are you where you are? Because normally they would meet with the Lord in the evening in the cool of the day and walk with him. So Adam says, I heard your voice in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked and I hid myself. So Adam had never been afraid of God before. So this relationship was broken. This is what sin does. And it affects all our relationships. Our relationship to one another. When a husband and wife have an argument, it breaks that relationship. There's tension there. It takes a while to kind of reconcile and get back together. And this is all the result. They never had an argument. Can you imagine a couple never having an argument and a couple being comfortable with God? I mean, this just shows you, how bad, the situation immediately became. Okay, so this is what started with this fall. And Paul talks about in a couple places he talks about the obedience of faith. He says this in Romans 1:5 and Romans 16:26. So this is all over now. So he uses this phrase, obedience of faith. What does that mean? Well, this is give you a little grammar here. This is called a genitive of apposition. Okay, so what does that mean? So this means a genitive of apposition means obedience, which is faith. All right. So what Paul talks about here is that faith is obedient. Faith is obedience. So God told Adam, and he told the woman, don't eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. All right. It took faith to believe that. When the reason Eve eats is she's no longer believing what God says. She's forgotten, or she has been convinced See, Satan is very subtle. Satan says, he first twists the scriptures a little bit, because he says, God knows that the day that you eat thereof, you will be like gods, knowing good and evil. Was that true? Yeah, it was true. But it came at tremendous cost. All right? So when he says that you will be like gods, he's not saying you will be like God. I think that was a step too far. But he was talking about the gods, the heavenly host, the divine council, the divine beings that attend God. And they apparently had some knowledge of this. And so they said, you will be like them if you eat. So they said, oh, well, maybe God is withholding some good thing from us. And this was the subtlety of the temptation. And then, after he gets Eve, the woman, on the ropes, then he says, you will not surely die. So this is the first lie. And Jesus, of course, says that Satan is the father of lies. This is the way, he works. All trickery, all deceit, it's not immediately in your face. It's a subtle, it all looks good. And it looks good, and she says, oh, well, maybe you begin to doubt a little bit. And then the actual lie comes in. You will not really die. So this is the way we kind of have to constantly keep in mind about the nature of deceit and deception, because Satan does, he appeals to us. It sounds like, oh, it would be so enjoyable to do these things, but it's all deceit, it's deception, and he's subtle. So this is the way all this begins here. So they've fallen here, and then I want to go in to look at this matter of Cain and Abel. So God gives the promise that in Genesis 3:15 of about a coming Redeemer and would fix all of this problem of sin. And so we see in chapter 4. Verse 1, he says, and Adam knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain, and said, I've gotten a man from the Lord. So the couple, I am convinced they had no idea. They thought that, okay, this is a problem, the sin, we're fallen, but God will fix it. And God will fix it pretty soon. And so when she says, I have gotten a man from the Lord, she thinks this son is going to be the one that's going to fix everything. This one that's going to, make it like it was before. Okay? But it was not to be. And, it still isn't fixed, really. I mean, Christ has died for our sins and risen from the dead, and he has won the strategic victory. God has dealt with our sin. But we still have this sin, and so it won't be until we receive resurrection bodies that we will be free of this body of sin and death. Okay, so we have this other brother here, Abel, and it says in verse 2, and she bore his brother Abel, and Abel was a keeper of the sheep, and Cain was a tiller of the ground. So Abel is a shepherd, and Cain is a farmer. All right. So it comes here. I wanted to mention here when I forgot to say, and this is critical. They sow Adam and Eve sow fig leaves together, but what does God do? He provides them with clothes of skin, right? So what did that require? That required an animal sacrifice. It required the killing of an animal. It required the shedding of blood. And we know from the scripture that the life of the flesh is in the blood. Then without the shedding of blood, there is no remission, there is no forgiveness. And so this begins this pattern that a sacrifice, a blood sacrifice, is required for the forgiveness of sin. All right, and so this is important when we come to these two brothers. And so in verse 3 it says, in the process of time it came to pass that Cain brought of the fruit of the ground an offering unto the Lord. And Abel also brought of the firstlings of his flock and of the fat thereof. And the Lord had respect unto Abel and his offering, but unto Cain and his offering he had no respect. And Cain was very angry, and his countenance fell. Okay, so what is the significance of this? Well, Cain worked very hard. He was a hard worker. I'm sure that what he brought from his fields was the finest of his produce. He was the elder. He was the firstborn. Abel brought an animal sacrifice. God respected Abel's sacrifice. He had no respect for Cain. Why? It was not offered in faith. There was no obedience of faith. God had made it clear that there was a blood sacrifice that was required. Cain wouldn't believe God. He would not obey God. All right? Abel would. And so this is why we read in let's see, First John chapter 3 makes this point. In, let's see, verse 12, John writes of Cain, he says, not as Cain, who was of that wicked one, and slew his brother. And why did he slay him? Because his own works were evil, and his brother's righteous. So why was Abel's works righteous? Because he believed God. He did what God said. He offered a blood sacrifice. So then we have this, going back to Genesis, this questioning between, God is talking to Cain, and he says, why are you angry? Why is your face fallen? If you do well, shall you not be accepted? And if you do not well, sin lies at the door, and unto you shall be his desire, and you shall rule over him. Well, what does that mean? What does that mean? Well, the same word for sin, when it says that sin lies at the door, the same word for sin here is for a sin offering. When you look in Leviticus, and it talks about the sin, it's not only the sin, but is the offering for the sin offering. So God is telling him, he says, I provided a sin offering for you if you'll just use it. It's lying at the door. All you have to do is use it. But he won't do it. And so he says, and what does he mean? It says, and unto you shall be his desire, and you shall rule over him. There's a couple possibilities. He may be talking about sin here, or ruling over sin by virtue of the fact of offering a sin offering. But he may also be talking about his brother Abel. Okay? So Cain, you don't know what kind of family dynamic was going on here between these brothers. There's always some dynamic between brothers or sisters or whatever. There's something going on. And so God has accepted Abel's offering, and Cain knew it, and he had rejected Cain's offering. And so there may have been some jealousy, some envy, some resentment between those. And God says, look, you're the firstborn. If you do what I say, you will rule over your brother. Because the firstborn, he's he has the preeminence there. And so God is saying, look, if you'll just do what I say, you'll rule over your brother. You don't have to worry. You don't have to be jealous. You don't have to be envious. You will rule over him. He won't have the privilege that you seem to think that you may have lost. So this is what's going on here. But But it didn't happen, because we read in the next verse, and Cain talked with Abel, his brother, and it came to pass when they were in the field, Cain rose up against his brother and killed him. So, they couldn't reconcile. They couldn't. And why? Because Cain was not willing to believe God. He was not willing to offer an animal sacrifice. Cain thought he was a rationalist. He said, look, I worked hard. In my fields, I brought God my best produce. I did, God should recognize that. It's not the way it works. It's the obedience of faith. We believe what God says. We come God's way. If we don't, we'll miss out. And Cain refused to do that. Okay? All right. So I want to move to Genesis chapter 6 now. So we're going through here. Is that clear to everyone? Does that make sense? All right. Okay, so we have this passage here, this interesting passage. He says, verse 1 of chapter Genesis 6, it came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, daughters were born unto them. The sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them wives for which they chose. Okay, so one of the things that's characteristic about Hebrew is parallelism. You see it over and over and again. You read, like a psalm or something, it'll say one thing a certain way, and it'll basically repeat that same concept, that thought, in the next verse. So here you've got, in verse 6 here it says, it came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, daughters were born unto them. So you have men and daughters. Okay, these are parallel. But then in verse 2, you don't have men and daughters. So he says you have sons of God and daughters. All right, sons of God. That's sons of God are not men. All right. Throughout the Old Testament, the Beni Elohim are always spoken of as angels. Beni Elohim are angels. There are no sons of God written about in the Old Testament as men. They're always angelic beings. Sons of God are direct creations. The angels were direct creations. They did not, there's just the same number of angels today as there were, a billion years ago or whatever. They don't reproduce. They are direct creations. So then, when you look at a passage, we're given two genealogies in the Gospels, one in Matthew and one in Luke. And Luke goes all the way back to Adam, and Adam is said to be the son of God. So because, wow, nobody else is. We have all those begets, and he was the son of, that through reproduction. But Adam is son of God because he was direct creation. And of course, we become sons and daughters of God because we're direct creations in the sense of spiritual birth. Okay, so we're looking here at fallen angels. They see women and they say they are desirable, and so they went down to the earth and had sexual relations with these women, and it says that verse 4, there were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, they bore children to them, and the same became mighty men which were of old of renown. So this was a hybrid production here. Angels, fallen angels, and human women, all right, and they produced these giants. All right, and we know in every culture we have these stories, these mythologies, and probably the most recognized one is, you just read the Hercules comics and things like that. Hercules had a divine father and a human mother. He was a demigod, and this is what these were, these mighty men. So what is going on here? Remember, I made this whole point, everything's created after its kind, and we are created after the image of God. This is a corruption of that image. See, this is biological genetic warfare here. And this is all satanic because Satan wants to corrupt the human genome, we would say today, the corruption of the human genome. And that's what's going on here. This is biological warfare. All right? So, it's very interesting here what God says about Noah. It says that in verse 9, he says, "These are the generations of Noah. Noah was a just man." This is the Hebrew word sadiq. If you go to New York City and you go on 57th and 5th and 6th Avenue, 57th or 47th Street, that's the Diamond District. You have these guys, these Jews with the black, they're all in black, the curls, some of them, they have beards and everything. These are the Hasidim, the righteous ones. That's where we get, Ha in Hebrew means the, and Sadiq means righteous, and the I am is the plural in Hebrew. So Hasidim are the righteous ones. This is the way the Jews refer to themselves. Kind of interesting spirits if you ever go to New York City to see that. Particularly if you're there to buy diamonds, which I wasn't. But so he says that Noah is righteous, he's just, and then he says he's perfect in his generations. What does that mean? So this word perfect here is this word tamim. And it's the same word that is used remember when the Jews have the first Passover. They're down in Egypt, and God is going to send forth the destroying angel. And what do? They kill a lamb, and this is the word for this lamb is without spot or blemish. And this is that word tamim here. So it is without defect, without any defect. It's a wholesome animal. So what God is saying here is that Noah had none of this pollution, this corruption of his human genome in his generations. He was free of all of that. All right? So this is the point, and God is going to destroy this world by the flood because it is evil. Not only is mankind constantly murdering and doing evil, it says that, somewhere in here it says that every thought of his imagination was evil. All right? This is the kind of world that it had become. And there was also this corruption of the genome. Yes, sir?
I just had a question about that word tamim.
Yeah.
Was it reference to Abraham? Or did you just make a side reference? I didn't know. Was it?
Oh, was he righteous? I don't know. It was probably Sadiq that was the word for Abraham. I have to look it up, but I would suspect that's the normal word for. And when God says Abraham believed God and he counted it unto him for righteousness, that's most likely Sadiq. That's the normal word for just or righteous in the Old Testament. But this is something different. This tamim means to be physically, biologically pure. His bloodline was uncorrupted by this incursion of these fallen angels. And what's interesting here is, so God wipes out this world here, wipes out all the giants, the gigantes is the way it's translated in the Septuagint. But it also says in verse 4, and also after that. So you say, well, what happened? When the Jews come into the land, when the Jews come out of Egypt, they come into the land, they're about to go into the land, and they say, well, let's go and let's do a recon and spy it out. And what do they see? They see giants. And they say, these are some big guys over there, we can't beat them. All right? So where did they come from? Well, it says, and also after that. There was another incursion of these fallen angels with women, and they produced these giants. And these giants will come and they will remain until the time of David. David finally wipes them all out. He kills them all. All right, and they're gone. But this is what was going on. This was a satanic attempt to destroy this, the image of God, who we are. And all these attempts, now of this transgender and all of this stuff, there's discussion about, how many sexes there are, how many genders there are. These are all satanic attacks upon who we are as human beings. We are male and female. We are created in the image of God. And, messing around with that is to destroy the image of God. That's why, it's male and female. It's not male and male. It's not female and female. It's male and female. This is who we are as the image of God. All right? Okay, so we have the flood. And after the flood, the world is completely different. Before the flood, everybody was vegetarian. No one ate meat. After the flood, God said you can eat meat. God also established capital punishment in Genesis 9:6. God establishes that if you kill a person, then you will forfeit your life. Why? Because human life is valuable. We are different. We are created in the image of God. We're not animals. People kill animals all the time, and you may like it or not like it, but we're different from animals. I was teaching a high school Sunday school class. They kind of bought into all this stuff. Well, animals, killing animals and everything. It's just there was kind of like going to it's just as bad to kill animals as a human being. So I said, well, I don't think I'll shock these kids. And so I said, okay, well, I know you have a little brother, so I go over to your house and I'll kill your little brother, but I give you a dog instead. Does that work? No, it doesn't work. See, they begin to think about these things, Human beings are valuable, we're special, we're created in the image of God. Okay, so the other thing we see that before the flood there were long lives. They all lived to be 900 and something years ago. Then after the flood, you can chart it out, just the genealogies, it all just drops down. The lifespans drop down. Tremendous drop. Okay, so let's go over to, kind of going to get through Genesis here. So this first program that God deals with is God's dealing with all of mankind. And that program goes from basically Genesis 1 through Genesis 11. All right? So when we come up to Genesis 11, we have this famous story of the Tower of Babel. So we read in chapter 11, verse 1, it says, the whole earth was of one language, of one speech. And it came to pass as they journeyed from the east, that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. This is down where what was Babylon. And they said to one another, go to, let us make brick and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone and slime for mortar. And they said, go, let us build us a city and a tower whose top may be reach into heaven, and let us make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. So God had told them to fill the earth, to multiply and scatter. And they said, no, we don't want to do that. We want to consolidate ourselves, and to do that, we're going to build this great building, and its top is going to reach to heaven. And these were known as ziggurats. And these ziggurats were found throughout the ancient Near East, throughout all these people built these things. Now, you say, well, were these people dumb? Did they really think that they could build a building that would reach heaven? No, they didn't. They knew that they couldn't do that. What they did know was that there was this, they knew something about the gods, this heavenly host. They knew about heaven. And what they were trying to do was build a representation of this stairway between earth and heaven. So you remember when Jacob falls asleep, and he has this dream, and we call it Jacob's ladder. It really wasn't a ladder. I mean, because angels can't ascend and descend on a ladder, that's very awkward. It was this stairway or this roadway that they were coming up and down. All right, so this is what these people were trying to build. They were trying to meet with the gods, and they were building this building that would represent this. And we see the same kind of thing when, it's a very interesting passage. If you look over in Exodus chapter 24, fantastic passage, just about how God revealed himself. So Exodus 24, and beginning at verse 9, we read, "Then went up Moses and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and 70 of the elders of Israel." So all the rulership here of Israel. And they saw the God of Israel. So who did they see? They saw Jesus Christ. All right, they saw the God of Israel, and there was under his feet, as it were, a paved work of sapphire stone, and as it were, the body of heaven in its clearness. And the nobles of the children of Israel, and upon the nobles of the children of Israel, he laid not his hand. Also, they saw God and did eat and drink. All right, so they saw this, and this is what these people were wanting to do. All right, but God had, this was not in God's plan. God reveals himself when he, wishes. Jesus says, to what was it, Pilate, you will see the angels ascending and descending upon the Son of Man. Okay, so what God does here, he says, so if you go back to Genesis chapter 11, and God came down, verse 5, the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of men builded. And the Lord said, Behold, the people is one, and they have all one language, and this they begin to do. And now nothing will be restrained from them which they have imagined to do. So this is a bad thing. Nothing that, because what you have here is a consolidation of power. This is the first attempt for world religion and world government. If you have world government, you have absolute power. The Lord Acton, the British guy, said, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So you have world government, and you have no recourse. There's no checks and balances in world government. And so God says, verse 7, let us go down that they and there confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from there upon the face of all the earth, and they left off to build the city. So they didn't get to complete their ziggurat. They couldn't understand one another. To build a building, you have to be able to understand. He said, go get a box of nails. And he says, what did he say? But God created nation states here to balance powers. Countries may not like one another. The Spanish don't like the French. The English don't like the Spanish. The Germans don't like the French. But they form alliances. They say, in English we say, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So we form alliances to balance out these powers, so that one nation cannot be too powerful. So this has been this is the way God protects humanity. You have world government, and you have no checks and balances. There's nothing there. You're subject to that government. All right. So this is what God did. This was an act of mercy of God, because we're fallen creatures. If you get all power, then you do bad things. So this was God's reaction to this so that he would be able to preserve the freedoms in the human race. Does that make clear? Is that clear? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Do you think with the people knowing what had happened with the angels and the women, that there was a desire for them for that to continue, or was there any sort of understanding of that and maybe wanting that to further?
Yeah, it's a hard question to answer what they were really thinking with all of that. And it's hard. We're just not. It's all speculation. I mean, we're just not. We're not given information of what all they knew, and all of these cultures seem to have a knowledge of some of the activity. When you read about these visions in Isaiah and Ezekiel about the cherubim, the seraphim, these divine creatures, and these are they've got wings and all of this. Well, all of these people knew something about them. I mean, when you go to you look at ancient Assyria, well, they have the winged bull. Where did they get that idea? They got it from. They have a knowledge of what's going on in heaven some way. All right, so they know some things. And when I was in seminary, I did a paper on Egyptian religion, and I was astonished that the layout of the Jewish temple or the tabernacle. The outer court, the holy place, and then inside the holy of holies. Egyptians had the same thing. Same thing. So they have, and of course, what is the tabernacle a representation of it? The tabernacle is a representation of the throne complex of God. All right. So when you have the mercy seat, the Ark of the Covenant there, what is that? That's the very throne of God. That's the innermost, the sanctum sanctorum. That is the Holy of Holies. All right, that's where God sits. And so, on the lid there, the mercy seat was called the mercy seat of the Ark of the Covenant there, the cherubim, they're facing. Well, God is right there in the middle. They are attending him. So this was all God gave Moses, the pattern, and these ancient peoples had a knowledge. And they all practiced animal sacrifices too. When every culture practiced animal sacrifice to appease the gods. When you read about Alexander the Great, when he would go out to battle, he would slaughter hundreds of animals to get the gods' favor, so he would be victorious in battle. All right. So this was part and parcel to all these ancient cultures. They understood. Now they had a perversion. Their knowledge was corrupt, but they had some knowledge of these things to go by.
So you think that the women then were conscious of the fact that they were mating with angelic beings, or not?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
And,
you read of these stories in mythology, like Leda and the swan. The god is, I've forgotten, I remember when I studied English literature, there's a poet, Leda and the swan, and so I think as Jupiter or something comes in the appearance of a swan and has sex with a woman and produces offspring. So they had all these things. So yeah, they knew that these divine beings, that these divine beings look like human beings. You can't tell the difference, because when the angels come to Abraham, right before they go into Sodom and Gomorrah, they look like men. Abraham entertains them as guests. They eat and everything. So these angels, and so the question is, the pushback. People, this is a controversial passage to who these sons of God are. Some say that the righteous line of Seth, and the objection really is, and I didn't cover this, but Jesus says, when he's asked about the Jews come to him and they say, what about the resurrection? And the Sadducees, didn't believe in the resurrection, and they said, okay, well, let me give, this is one of these schoolboy things they did. They say, well, we don't believe in the resurrection because if a woman is married several times, then who's going to be her husband in heaven? And Jesus says, they are like the angels in heaven. They neither marry, or I have children. And so people say, well, these angels couldn't have sexual relationships. But notice what Jesus says, they are like the angels in heaven. The angels in heaven do not have sexual relationships, but Jude tells us they left their first estate. Okay, they left heaven. When they left heaven, they engaged in sexual relationships. All right.
I also thought that, if those offspring really were, from Seth, like righteous from Seth, why would they have been wiped out in the flood?
Right.
It doesn't make sense, right?
Well, the argument would be, well, the earth was corrupt because of, just the sin and everything, and God wiped them out. But there's more to it because, Noah, the key thing to really see with that was this Tamim, where it talks about Noah being perfect in his generations. He's unblemished in his generations. So that's really the clue, to that. Why, one of the reasons why Noah is perfect. He's just, he's righteous in that he believes God, but he's also doesn't have a corrupted bloodline.
Yeah. Going back to what Sharita said earlier about did the women know that they were having sex with angels? Well, yes, they did. Yes, they did. And the angels, if you read the book of Enoch, although it's not inspired, but Jude does refer to the book of Enoch, the angels were teaching them things. They were teaching them things about the stars. They were teaching them magic, a lot of things that mankind didn't know. So they were learning from them in the process as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So what we've done here now is complete or at least go through the first program where God is. It's gone, but it's gone. God has dealt with all mankind. All right. So God is, things have not turned out well. You have Adam and Eve created in the perfect environment. They sin. You have the beginning of murder with Cain and Abel. You have this incursion of angelic, corruption of the human race. God destroys the world with a flood. You have the Tower of Babel. All of this is going on. This is not going swimmingly as far as human history. So God determines to do something entirely different. So you have this first program where God is dealing with all mankind from Genesis 1 through Genesis 11. So he's going to do something entirely different now. And I don't know if you want to take a break or, whether we just drive on. What do y'all want to do? Drive on? Okay. All right. So we come to Genesis chapter 12. All right. So we're going to look at this as the second program. Well, God will begin to create this new people, this which is known as Israel. And so we look at verse 1. It says, "And the Lord had said unto Abram, Get out of your country, from your kindred, and from your father's house, unto a land I will show you. And I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you, and make your name great, and you will be a blessing. And I will bless them that bless you, and curse him that curses you, and in you shall all the families of the earth be blessed." All right. So God draws this man out, Abram, from Ur of the Chaldees, and he says, I'm going to come out of your people, out of your land, and I'm going to show you a land to give you. So this is the beginning. Abraham is the father of the Jews, all right? He's not a Jew, obviously. You have to start somewhere. He's a Gentile, because there are no Jews at this stage. But God divides the human race into these two peoples now. So there are Jews and there are Gentiles. All right. So, one of the great provisions, and when you look at Israel, you can't have Israel without the land. The land and Israel are together. Land and Israel. Land and Israel. You just can't uncouple these two. All right. So God tells him from the very beginning, I'm going to give you a land. All right. And he says he's going to make his name great, and they're going to be a blessing. And he says, one of the things that you know, remember I mentioned about parallelism, and you don't have parallelism here. You would, if you read this, and if you read it carefully, you know, God says here, I will bless them that bless you. And what you expect here is to say, and curse them that curse you. But that's not what it says. It says, I curse him who curses you. So the parallelism breaks here. Who is him? Him is Satan, because all anti-Semitism spawns from Satan. That's the source of it all. Why? Because God is doing a new thing here. Satan understands that God is setting aside the Gentiles, and he's going to create a new covenant people through whom he will reveal himself. And so Abram and his line here becomes the center of gravity for satanic attack. And that is still the case, all right? So what we read here, this is very important to us, and he says, and in you shall all families of the earth be blessed. All, let me emphasize, all divine blessing comes through Israel. All of it. There is no Gentile blessing apart from Israel. And of course, who is the great Jew? Can you say Jesus of Nazareth? All right. So all divine, but God does not deal with the Gentiles alone any longer. He deals with us through Israel. All right. He deals with us through Israel, through Christ, and as we will see, for the church through Paul. All right. So all divine blessing comes through Israel, because this is God has set aside. God is doing something new, entirely different. All right. So he tells one of the things that we see here when God begins to tell him about the blessing and his children. There's two blessings, or two concepts with a blessing. Remember, we started out Genesis 1, in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth. There's two realms, heaven and earth. All right, so let's look at Genesis chapter 13, and we read in verses 14 through 16, it says, and the Lord said unto Abram, after that Lot was separated from him, lift up your eyes and look from the place that you are northward and southward and eastward and westward. For all the land which you see, to you will I give it, and to your seed or your descendants. How long? Forever. Forever. So here we have this earth, there's heaven and earth, and this is the earth piece, all right? And then he goes on in verse 16, he says, and I will make your descendants as the dust of the earth, so that if a man can number the dust of the earth, then shall your seed be numbered. So this is, so then he goes on and says, and walk through the land in the length and breadth of it, for I will give it unto you. All right? So this is why I say you cannot separate the Jew from the land. It is embedded in it. All right? Well, God gives another promise here in Genesis 15. He talks to Abraham. And in Genesis 15, we have the formal, the formal setting agreement of the Abrahamic covenant. But in Genesis chapter 15, let's see, we start in verse 4, let's say. And he says, and behold, the word of the Lord came unto him, saying, this shall not be your heir. He's talking about Eleazar of Damascus, up in verse 2. But he that shall come forth out of your own being shall be your heir. And he brought him forth, and he said, look now toward heaven. Okay, so here's the heavenly piece. and number the stars, if you're able to number them. And he said unto him, so shall your descendants be. So this is the heavenly piece. So you have dust of the earth is earthly, and stars in the sky is heavenly. And what is associated with this promise? It says, and he believed in the Lord, and he counted it to him for righteousness. So in the first one, there's the dust of the earth, and it's the earth is associated with the land. Here's the stars, and it's associated with faith. And this is why Paul uses Abraham in Romans 4. It says, Abraham believed God, and it was counted unto him for righteousness. That is us. We have a heavenly destiny. Israel doesn't have a heavenly destiny. There was no Jew that ever thought, what do we think? We think we die and go to heaven, right? Die and go to heaven. That's who we are. No Jew ever thought that they were going to die and go to heaven. No one ever had any concept of that. They didn't die and go to heaven. They died and went to paradise, and they hoped for resurrection in the land. Every promise to the Jew is earthly. This is why the Lord says, when the disciples come to him and they say, Lord, teach us to pray. And he says, our Father who art in heaven, thy kingdom come, thy will be done, where? On earth as it is in heaven. Every promise to the Jew is earthly. Every promise to us is heavenly. This is why Paul talks about in Philippians 3:20, he says we have heavenly citizenship. Our destiny is not earthly, our destiny is heavenly. And we're all children of Abraham. All the Jews are children of Abraham. Israel is a technical term. Israel always means the offspring of Jacob, right? Because that's who Israel was. He was Jacob. And then God, after he wrestled, with God, and God said, I'm going to rename you and give you the name of Israel. All right? So all the Jews come. Israel is a technical term for ethnic, racial Israel. And of course, there's unbelieving Israel, and there's believing Israel. This is why Paul talks about and says, all Israel is not Israel. So because they're Jews, they're children of Abraham, but they're not true Jews in the sense that they have faith. They're spiritual, all right? But we're also children of Abraham by faith. We don't become Jews when we believe in Christ, but we're sons and daughters of Abraham, all right? Because we believe God like Abraham believed God. We are that heavenly people, and it's associated with faith, all right? So Israel and the children of Abraham are not equal. They overlap, but they're not equal. So they're two different things, because Israel is always a technical term for the sons and daughters of Jacob. All right? Is that clear? Make sense? Okay, so in chapter 22, we have both of these brought together. And so in chapter 22, verse 17, we read, and says that in blessing I will bless you, and in multiplying I will multiply your seed, or your descendants, as the stars of the heaven, and as the sand upon the seashore, and your descendants shall possess the gates of his enemies. All right. So you have these two realms, these two people, stars and, well, in this case not dust, but sand on the seashore. And interestingly enough, in the latter, it says, your seed or your descendants shall possess the gates of his enemies. Isn't that interesting? Because the thing about Israel is, for most of Israel's history, they have been trodden under the feet of the Gentiles, right? I mean, particularly beginning with when the Assyrians come down and take the northern kingdom, and from then on, I mean, Israel is under the thumb, under the authority of the Gentiles. But not forever. Not forever. Because if you come over to Deuteronomy chapter 28, we read what's going to happen here. So Deuteronomy is the fifth book of Moses. So Deuteronomy chapter 1 says, and it shall come to pass, if you will hearken diligently unto the voice of the Lord your God, to observe and do all his commandments, which I command you this day, that the Lord your God will set you on high above all the nations of the earth. So God says, if you obey me, I will set you above all the nations of the earth. This is Israel's destiny. They've been trodden down for most of human history. But God says, I'm going to set you up above all the Gentile nations. In verse 13, he says, and the Lord shall make you the head and not the tail. Would you rather be the head or the tail? All right? So you'd rather be the head, you know. And you shall be above only, you shall not be beneath, if you hearken unto the commandments of the Lord your God, which I command you this day to observe and do them.
What chapter are you in?
28.
28 verse 1.
Chapter 28, verses 1 and 13. So this is why God says what he does here and associates, because Israel is the dust, the sand, and this is why he says what he says, you will possess the gate of your enemies. That is, what that means is that, you know, the gate was a place where the authority was. And so it says you will be, and when you read the prophets, I mean, we just finished our Bible study back in Virginia. We spent about, I don't know, 3 or 4 months going through Isaiah. And that's all you read about. All you read about is this kingdom and how God is going to, the Jews are going to be elevated and the Gentiles are going to look to the Jews, all right, in the kingdom, all right? So this is, it hasn't been fulfilled yet, but it will be. All right, so you got these two lines of progeny here, these descendants, sand and stars. The Jews are the sand, we are the stars, the Gentiles. So these are all, we're all have Abraham as our father. All right. Okay, so you know the story. I won't go through all this. You know, Abraham, God promises him all these great descendants, and they go on and on and on, and they can't have children. They can't have children, and they get frustrated. And so Sarah comes up with this great idea for Abraham to have a child with Hagar, her handmaid. And he agrees to that, and they have this son, Ishmael. And so then later on, of course, as more time goes by, they finally have the son, Isaac. And we look over here in Genesis chapter 17. Now, God loves Ishmael, and Abraham loved Ishmael, and so let's look at Genesis chapter 17, and we look at verse 18 here. Maybe I'll just read 17. He says, God, you know, we'll look at verse 15. So he says, and God said unto Abraham, as for Sarah your wife, you will not call her